Thank you very much for this opportunity to reflect with colleagues on the state of the institution and the progress that we have made over the last 2 years or so. Today is the 15th of July 2021, and it's almost 2 years since the establishment of the administration period. That means that between now and the 15th of August, we have exactly 1 month to complete all of the assignments that we had been given to complete and to undertake. The main purpose of these being to secure the institution from defaulting to the status quo ante. And so a fundamental difference then between previous administrations here at VUT in the last 14 years or so has been that, or is that, the administrator has been given a period of 2 years to introduce deep change in the organization. Previous administration periods were for periods of 6 months. And these tended to be largely focused on changing institutional statutes rather than deep change across the organization. Of course, the work that we have undertaken and continue to undertake must be continued under the leadership of the new council. We expect to induct the new council in the middle of August, signaling then the end of the administration period. It will also have to continue under the stewardship and the leadership of the new Vice-Chancellor. And you will have noticed that we have now put out the advert for the new Vice-Chancellor, and we do expect that that would be the first order of business of Council, that is the appointment of the new Vice-Chancellor. And so where do we begin with this conversation? We begin with the report of the Assessors and their recommendations. You will recall that the assessors addressed a range of matters. One of the key concerns was the council itself, the capacity of council to undertake its stewardship role and to undertake it so informed by good governance, and informed by those very important duties of skill, of diligence, and of course the duty of standing in a fiduciary relationship with the institution. Big concerns also about the manner in which council members were selected and appointed. Big concerns about the balance of membership between internal and external, with internal dominating against and outside of the law, the Higher Education Act. And then big concerns about the absence of declarations of interest on the part of councillors. There was also a big concern about the capacity of the executive management, post levels 1 to 3, to take the institution out of its quagmire, out of its rudderless state. And big concerns then about also the fact that many of the positions in executive management were occupied on an acting basis, leaving therefore a situation in which effective stewardship and direction of the institution was not undertaken, and undertaken purposefully and consistently. A major concern, still speaking about management, relating to post levels 4 and 5, and about the commitment of colleagues occupying these positions to the institution, to its strategic plan, to its role here in the VAL, specifically in Gauteng, more generally, and in the country and continent and world. The absence of performance management featured strongly in the assessors report, as did the appointment process for the Vice-Chancellor. Deep concern amongst the assessors that the process was politicized, and the outcomes were not always favorable and serving the interests of the institution, and therefore concern for us to remediate those processes. A big concern raised about supply chain processes in the institution and the importance of punishing and blacklisting those service providers who in the past have been found to be corrupt or involved in corruption in the institution. Big argument put forward for the establishment of the Office of the Ombud, a whistleblower fraud hotline, the introduction of lifestyle audits for executive managers and for councillors, and the importance of regular institutional culture reality checks in order to see if there is alignment between the intended ambitions and goals of the institution and the actual reality on the ground, so to speak. And then finally, the assessors also address themselves to the importance of engaging the Special Investigative Unit, or the SIU, and the pursuit of criminal wrongdoing in the institution, both from a criminal point of view as well as from a recovery of resources point of view. These findings of the assessors largely were in line with what I and my team then, the administrators task team, found as we began to understand the institution better over beginning in August 2019 and progressing to this point. Our key finding, of course, still is, as we look back, of an adrift institution, a broken institution. And so we identified key areas. We tried to understand why these 7 areas were the focal points for the institution losing its way and breaking down in important respects. And we were trying to understand the impact of these, because when we were able to understand the why and the impact, we were then in a position to put in place measures of remediation in the short term, but also measures in the medium to long term to disable a default to the status quo ante. And so, what then are these areas, and perhaps more importantly, so what was going on here in the institution? Was there a battle over the spoils, so to speak? We heard many colleagues passionately speaking about the importance of retaining procurement and resource allocation here in the VAL, given that the VAL itself finds itself isolated from, if you like, the mainstream of Gauteng and of the country, and that the university should play an important role in enabling the local community to participate in its procurement systems, in its building projects, and so on and so forth. And so let's begin, therefore, at the beginning. The question of governance and management. It is self-evident that we had a complete collapse of good governance in the institution, as well as oversight, and finally of management controls in the institution. And so let's spend some time then to reflect on the scope of this governance oversight collapse and management controls failure in the institution. And so there are 7 key points of breakdown that cut across the administration and academic portfolios, and that will have to become the focal point of the new council and of the new vice-chancellor and leadership team going forward, and of everybody in the institution. It cannot be the case that a council and a management or executive management create conditions in which the institution simply goes astray, simply collapses, and the rest of us in the institution simply observe, as opposed to act, take action, intercede, demand accountability, demand performance, demand explanations, demand reports, regular reports about the state of the institution. And so inasmuch as council carries immense responsibilities, so does management, but also so does every member of staff. And I encourage you, as we go forward into the years that lie ahead, that you step up and raise your voices. So what then are these 7 areas? Just a quick rundown, and then we will spend time examining each one of these 7 areas. I've already spoken, of course, about council and executive management, and therefore the collapse of good governance and institutional oversight. So that is one area. So good governance and institutional oversight, the key role of council. And I will speak about that as I've indicated in some depth in a moment. The second area, of course, again, an area I've referred to as executive management. So the role of the leadership and management of the institution. And again, why this has collapsed. What was the problem? We will examine those and indicate the actions that we have taken in order to remediate short and medium term the second area. The third area, as the assessors have drawn our attention to, of course, relates to supply chain, and I will spend again time reflecting on supply chain management, what has broken down, why is it broken down, and what measures have we put in place to remediate the situation. The next area is new building projects. Again, I hope it will become self-evident as to why these areas are areas of major weakness in the institution, and how we are remediating these. The area of staffing has turned out perhaps to be the next area of grave concern, and I will share with you some detail as to what has gone wrong there and what we have done to remediate that situation. The next area is the accreditation and contracting of private student residences. This would always have been a troubling area and a troubled area, and I will speak to that and give an insight into how these things work and why, when they work in that manner, they contribute to breakdown. And that would help us, therefore, also understand and appreciate what needs to be done to remediate the situation. The next area is that of admission, of access, of progression and graduation as a key area. And again, I will demonstrate how collusion works between staff on the one hand and former students, and how such a system of admission, access, progression, and graduation itself collapses. The next area is the area of the PQM, that's the 7th area, is the program and qualification mix of the institution, its extended curriculum programs, and our falling enrollments, especially in our key areas of engineering and technology and applied and computer sciences. And I will examine with you and take you through what explains the falling enrollment and what must be done, what we are doing, and what must still be done going forward. And so when we examine then each one of these areas, you will notice that there are consequences. when these 7 areas go into free fall, or they break down, or they collapse, then institutional culture and ethics also go into a free fall. It precipitates financial disaster and ruin, and I will demonstrate this in this conversation with you. And so, let's now then tackle each of these 7 areas and reflect on what we found and what we've done to remediate and reset the institution across these areas. All right, let's then begin this conversation and examine in some detail each one of these 7 areas. Let's reflect on the area of good governance and institutional oversight. It goes without saying that councils play an immensely important role in the life of an institution. They provide steering for the institution in terms of its strategic plan. In fact, they are accountable to the Minister and to the Department of Higher Education and Training for an annual performance plan, and of course for the approval of the university strategic plan. So you can already see the important role of a council. It is the medium-term, 5-year, 10-year horizon of steering an institution in the direction that is considered by council to be appropriate. And of course it does this in dialogue with the university's executive management. Councils also play an important role of ensuring that the institution then achieves those ambitions as outlined in its strategic plan and in its annual performance plan that it contracts with the Minister and the Department of Higher Education and Training. And therefore, receiving reports, spending time examining those reports, asking questions, probing, encouraging, supporting, inspiring the executive management, pushing them a little bit, pushing them sometimes a lot, demanding more, expecting more, praising executive management from time to time for great accomplishments. So that's another key role of council. Council plays an important role of securing that institutional controls are in place. And we speak here of controls across the full spectrum of the institution. Controls over the admission process. Controls are in place over the examination processes or assessment processes. Controls are in place over the award of qualifications in the institution. So from that one extreme, and by the way, controls over the program and qualification mix of the institution. Although that's a major role of Senate, a council cannot stand aside and simply say it is not its business to apply its mind to what the program and qualification mix is, because ultimately it is council that signs off with the executive management what we call in the university system the university's invoice. What is the university's invoice? The university's invoice to the Department of Higher Education and Training in essence says, these are the programs that we are offering that are approved by the Council of Higher Education. It's approved by the South African Qualifications Authority, and it is, or they are included, in the Department of Higher Education and Training's program and qualification mix. So first of all, we tick and we say, indeed, we are only offering programs that meet those criteria, and therefore the students who are enrolled in those programs, they are legitimately enrolled in those programs. That process is annually signed off by the university's external auditor. And so the external auditor spends time making sure that there are no failures, or as we call it again in our language, fatal failures. For example, a student is enrolled in a program that is not approved through any of the 3 processes that I've referred to a moment ago. And so, I'm simply illustrating the important role of counsel. And so counsel, therefore, has responsibility for oversight over the internal audit and the external audit of the institution. Counsel appoints the internal auditor, appoints the external auditor, receives those reports on a quarterly basis through typically its audit and risk committee, processes those, and makes sure that the institution, therefore, is on track and controls are in place. Controls are in place for appointment of staff. Controls are in place for that whole value chain relating to the appointment of staff, from making sure that there is a vacancy, an approved vacancy on the staff structure, making sure that the advert properly articulates that particular role, makes sure that the staffing department, the human resources department, complies with those requirements, makes sure, again through the audit process, that that entire chain leading up to the interview process, leading up to the appointment process, that those are all squeaky clean and above board. And so I can illustrate supply chain similarly, procurement more generally. Council takes responsibility for making sure, alongside the Vice-Chancellor, that the university complies with occupational health and safety legislation, with environmental legislation, with employment or broadly labour legislation. And so when council breaks down, when council is unable to meet regularly, when council has members, or at least don't have the capacities, don't have the skills amongst its members to execute this full range of responsibilities, then there's a problem. Then there's grave risk that the institution goes awry, that it goes off track. And so the appointment of appropriately skilled, across a range of skills and competencies, appropriately skilled and competent counsellors is important. And so the first thing that we did, therefore, was to review the institution statute and the rules of the university to make it absolutely clear what kind of capabilities we're looking for that comply with the Higher Education Act. The Higher Education Act spells out in some detail the expectations in respect of individual members of councils and the collective of councils. It spells out a whole range of issues relating declaration of conflicts of interest. And so we've therefore spent some time revising the statute in this regard, revising the university's rules. Some of the outcomes of these revisions, by way of example, is that we have reduced the council from a 30-member council to a 21-member council, in line with the Assessors' recommendations. And we've made it absolutely clear that the membership will comprise of 60% external and 40% internal, again complying with the Higher Education Act, and that no meeting of council will be quorate, or its committee meetings will be quorate, unless there's a majority, again 60-40 more or less, a majority of external members inside in those meetings. And the reason for this is very simple. It is important for us to have internal stakeholders represented on council, ranging from Senate, the SRC, across to the ManCom, Management Executive Committee, across to members of staff who are not members of Senate, academics that is, across to other members of staff who are not academics themselves. And so we have 8 members coming through that mechanism, 2 from Senate, 2 from the interim SRC, 1 each from academics who are not members of Senate and non-academic, 1 from non-academic members of staff, and 2 from the Management Executive Committee. And then a total of 13 coming from external parties, 6 to be appointed by the administrator, people of the necessary capabilities and skills and competence to give effect to the role of council in its collective, 5 members appointed by the minister, and then two members appointed by the administrator from the ranks of convocation or the alumni more generally. And that process is now in the final stages, that is, of the appointment of council. And we're hopeful that we will have in place a competent council. One of the requirements of councillors would be on a quarterly basis to declare their interests and to indicate if those interests have changed from quarter to quarter. It will also be a requirement that those documents, those quarterly documents of each of the councillors would be tabled in an ordinary council meeting so that there is full transparency across the 21 members of council, so that each member of council will have access to the other 20 members of council's declarations of interest. And one hopes then, by making that available, that it also increase the visibility, the accountability, and the commitment to good ethics and good governance in the institution. So a significant investment of time and effort, therefore, into the front end, or shall I say first the back end being the statute, the rules of the institution about how we conduct meetings of council, by way of example, and how councillors conduct themselves at the same time, across to the front end. That is the actual selection, election, and or appointment of councillors to the university council. And then, of course, of expecting councillors to play the role that they must play as required by the Higher Education Act, the University Statute, and the rules of the institution. And I've just given one example of such a rule with reference to the matter of quarterly declarations of interests. I've also referenced the role of council across the full spectrum. They play a role in setting the strategic direction, in requiring reporting and accountability from management against those that strategic plan, as well as the annual performance plan. They carry responsibility for driving and encouraging innovation, fresh thinking, renewal in the institution, in as much as they influence the strategic direction of the institution. And I want to simply wish the new council that we will inaugurate by the 15th of August. Want to wish the councillors well, and I certainly also look forward to the handover opportunity when we do sit down and give council chapter and verse review of the institution, pointing out what we have achieved and the focal points for council in the period going forward. The next and second area of focus for us during the administration period and that we have identified for the incoming council to apply its mind to is that of institutional leadership and management. Again, here the Assessors report reminds us that, or draws our attention urgently to a number of concerns here. They highlight major concern with leadership right at the top of the institution, and colleagues will know that we sensitively and carefully and in an Ubuntu manner engaged the Vice-Chancellor, and the Vice-Chancellor left the institution at the end of December of 2019, and we continue to wish Professor Zide well in his many ventures that he is currently occupied with. The report also drew attention to the troubling situation that we had acting Deputy Vice-Chancellors, and a range of other acting heads, including acting heads of academic departments. And the point here simply is, when one has acting executives in office, their main role, their substantive role, also has an acting person in place as they act in the more senior role. And so you can imagine the supply chain, this value chain that runs right from the top into the middle layers of the organization of acting persons. Consider, for example, that we had an acting DVC for resources and planning. We had an acting DVC for teaching, learning, and student services, who bravely undertook their work and professionally undertook their work. However, the fact is that they then also had to appoint acting executive deans, because they were substantive deans in their roles in the institution. Consider also that we then had a slew of acting academic heads of departments. I recall the first thing that I was told by the Dean of Applied and Computer Sciences was, Aaron, my specific problem is, out of 9 heads of department roles, 8 of them are acting. And that situation can't continue. I can't steward a portfolio, a deanery, in a context in which 8 out of 9 heads are acting, and we have huge churn, even in the case of acting heads of academic departments. 3 months this colleague, 3 months that colleague, 3 months that colleague. Clearly highly problematic. It means that we are unable to give detailed and sustained attention, and for that matter comprehensive attention, to the issues facing us. And I will speak about some of the consequences of this separately in a moment and later. In addition to these issues, major concerns raised in the Assessors reports again about the absence of performance management and holding accountable executive management and senior managers in the institution. I mean, the reality of that is that we can have a wonderful strategic plan, but if we do not hold accountable through a performance plan, a performance map, a performance goal and targets, if we can't hold or translate that strategic plan into action through performance plans, then that plan is not going to see the light of day. Wonderful, nicely packaged, it's not going to be implemented. As a result, one of the first things that I did was to engage with each of the ManCom members and with colleagues at post levels 4 and 5 to institutionalize performance planning and performance accountability in the institution. And of course, the way we put together performance plans and agreements is by extracting or deriving these from the institution's strategic plan. In fact, one of the first things that I had to do was to examine the university's strategic plan 2020 to 2024. And after extensive consultation with ManCom and with colleagues at post levels 4 and 5, I then, with minor adjustments, approved the institution's strategic plan, which will take us to 2024. And so that is in place, and that became the map from which we then were able to put together performance plans, performance agreements, performance journeys for each of the senior managers. Last year, in July and August, we began this journey of performance discussions, and I personally led the performance reviews of some 25, 28 colleagues in the institution, and I have shared previously with you the outcomes of those performance reviews, a rather mixed outcome of a handful of top performers, 2 hands full of poor performers, and the balance of colleagues performing in the middle, just about meeting the expectations of the roles that they were assigned to play in the institution. And so there'll be a number of additional measures that will also be in place to make sure that the executive and senior managers stay the course, focus themselves on the roles that they're expected to play, rather than them being distracted by a range of criminals and other syndicates that simply see VUT as a resource to be pillaged, as a place to be looted at the expense of our students, of our staff, and of our country. And so in place, we now have lifestyle audits. Just this past week, we approved a service provider who will undertake regular lifestyle audits of all colleagues at post levels 1 to 5, later expanded to post levels 6 to 9, to make sure that our income matches with our lifestyles and our experiences. And where there is a mismatch, for there to be an explanation and an investigation to be conducted if needs be. In addition to that, we have also approved the appointment of a service provider to establish for us a whistleblowing fraud hotline service. So that will kick in very shortly on the 1st of August, equally so. And as in the case of council, we will and we do require all senior managers and the executive management to complete on a quarterly basis their conflicts or potential conflicts of interest, and for these to be tabled both at management committee meetings on a quarterly basis as well as at council on a quarterly basis, so that there is a wide view. There are more eyes looking at these things and asking questions about us as individuals. And so the big intervention, though, that we had to make was to begin to fill the vacant posts. So we appointed Professor Linnington as the Dean, the DVC for Teaching, Learning and Student Services. We subsequently appointed Prof. Odio as the DVC for Research, Innovation, Commercialization and Internationalization. And as we all know, regrettably, he passed away due to COVID complications. And we continue to mourn his passing. And that, indeed, was a great blow and a great loss to us as an institution. We've also subsequently appointed our Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Nontando Mgobo, and we've made a number of appointments at post level 4, that is the Executive Director level. In Operations and Logistics, Mr. Leonard Swana, by way of example, as the Head of Student Support Services, Dr. Sibusiso Mkunu, by way of example, and a slew of other appointments have been made at post level 4. At post level 5, the most significant gaps were those in the academic departments. As a result of a revision of the practice of the institution, we've changed root and branch our approach to appointing academic heads of departments. Academic heads of departments, therefore, from now on are appointed from amongst their peers. These are not permanent appointments. These are 5-year contract appointments, and colleagues are then provided with a reasonable allowance as they undertake these roles as academic HODs. We've also slimmed down the number of academic departments from some 25, 26 to 16 academic departments. And as things stand, we are struggling to fill 3 of those 16 positions, and we will continue to do so. We hope to fill 1 of those by the end of this week, with the remainder possibly the remaining 2 out of 16 positions possibly going again for a re-advertisement. A key thing that we undertook was to review the executive management structure as well, post levels 1 through to 4. The upshot of that was that we disestablished a range of posts. So with the restructuring and revision of the academic HOD structure and the costs associated with it, for post levels 1 to 5, we saved 40 million rands in expenditure for the institution, expenditure that the institution would not have had in any event. I will come later to the finances of the institution. And so that then gives you a view, a picture of what we had undertaken in the last 2 years or so to begin to stabilize the executive management and senior leadership in the institution, to fill vacant posts, to put in place accountability, performance and reporting measures, and at the same time to put in place whistleblowing as well as lifestyle audits. There's one last matter I want to simply note then across this particular area. A key recommendation of the assessors was for us to institutionalize the office of the Ombud. We are now in the final stages of appointing an Ombud. The purpose, of course, of the Ombud is that should you as an individual member of staff have gone through the normal, for example, grievance processes of the institution, and you still feel that your voice has not been heard, that the outcome is unfavorable and is unsatisfactory, you would then be able to knock on the door of the Ombud, who will exist independent of management and who, in the main, will focus on mediating your dispute rather than undertaking major new investigations. The focus will be on mediating a positive and a constructive outcome for you and the university. So those then are the range of measures that we had considered and that we had put in place in respect of the executive management and senior leadership. I just want to underscore the important role of executive management and senior leadership under the stewardship of the Vice-Chancellor. It is their principal responsibility to give life, to give effect to the strategic plan of the organization, and to do so with Ubuntu, to do so with great appreciation of each individual in the institution and understanding of each individual in the institution, but with their minds focused on the annual performance plan and delivering it carefully and sensitively and sensibly. Why do we have annual performance plans and strategic plans? We have these because when we set goals and targets for ourselves, we can give greater effect to the role that this university of ours, the Vaal University of Technology, must play here in the Vaal, in the province, in the country, on the continent, and in the world. It's a major role that this university must play. And therefore, under the supervision of Council, the Vice-Chancellor, the executive management, the senior managers of the institution carry immense responsibility to give effect to that strategic plan broken down into annual performance plans. And so it's an immense responsibility to steward staff, to mobilize staff, to encourage staff, to push staff to go further than they've been, to support them, to provide the resources for them to accomplish these ambitious goals that we typically articulate in our annual performance plans and strategic plans. And again, I want to wish the incoming Vice-Chancellor, once Council has made its decision in that regard, as well as the executive management, all of the best in the period ahead. I've endeavoured, with the support of the Administrator's Task Team, to work closely and integrally with the Management Committee and with the senior managers of the university. Rather than sitting alone in a quiet space and orchestrating from that space, I have orchestrated with management, that is the senior managers, the executive managers of this university. I've sought to orchestrate the institution along the direction of its strategic plan, even amidst the enormous challenges and devastation that COVID-19 has brought to our institution, both in terms of the losses we have suffered amongst our colleagues and the pain our students and staff have suffered in respect of the effect, the experience and the long tail of COVID-19. And so I hope this gives then some insight into the important role of the executive management and senior managers under the stewardship of the Vice-Chancellor and the actions that are now in place to make sure that the institution does not default to the status quo ante.